You are listening to Read This Book, a Prince George Public Library podcast. We gratefully acknowledge that we conduct our work on the ancestral lands of the Lheidli T'enneh. Hello, everyone. I am Leslie. Each episode, a special guest will tell us about a book in our collection that has inspired, surprised, or captured them, and why we should read it. This week's guest is Amy. One of Amy's favorite things to read about is hockey, but not in the way that you would think. Hockey is a national pastime, almost universally loved, but Amy likes to read about the people who love the sport but aren't represented by it, and how they are changing the game. Amy also enjoys reading romance, especially LGBTQ+. Her favorite romance author is Rowan Parrish, having read all of their books. Recently, Amy has been reading about the history of northern BC. This spring, she's read Highway of Tears by Jessica McDiarmid and Against All Odds by John Brink. Amy's favorite childhood book was Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell. Although Amy acknowledges it is a problematic book, it glorifies slavery and perpetuates stereotypes about Black people. As a child, Amy enjoyed reading about a woman who could be imperfect, selfish, petty, and mean, and still be the protagonist of a book. And welcome, Amy.
Thank you for having me.
We're so excited that you're here.
I'm excited too.
So I learned something very interesting about you recently.
Okay.
That was very exciting for me, that I did not know about you. And that was that you have an English degree.
Oh, yes, I do.
Yes, and I also have an English degree.
Oh.
So I felt an immediate bond. And so I had some questions that I wanted to ask you. What was your favorite English class?
I took a lot of classes that focused on Victorian literature.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't pick just one, but those were my favorites.
Oh, excellent.
Yes.
Was there any books that you perhaps didn't read that you said that you did?
I did not read Moby Dick. So when it came to the final exam, that was a real struggle because I still have no idea what happened. Okay.
I think it's a big metaphor for life, I think. Yeah, let's go with that. So, we are here to talk about In My Own Moccasins, a memoir of resilience by Helen Knott.
Yeah.
Could you tell us what this book is about?
Yeah, so Helen Knott is an Indigenous woman from Prophet River First Nation. I think she grew up in and around Fort St. John. And the book is about many things. Overtly, it's about her problematic substance use and alcoholism and kind of that journey to overcome those struggles. It's about sexual violence and the impact that it has on women. But it's also like a love letter to family.
Oh. Can you tell us why we should read this book?
It has really heavy subject matter. So it might not be for everyone, and it could be very upsetting to read. But when Helen Knott talks about this book, she talks about how she wrote it for people that can understand the darkness that she experienced. But she also does it with like a real tenderness. And I find her to be really forgiving throughout her story. Not for the people that violated her, but she just has this wonderful openness. And so I really think it's an important book. And I think it's important for people that live in Prince George and Fort St. John and these like resource-based communities to understand the impact of, living in those places as a woman.
With forgiveness, do you think is she also forgiving herself?
Yes. Yeah. So a lot of the trauma that she experiences throughout her life, and by the time this book was published, she was still young, like 29 or 30. She experienced a lot as a teenager, as a young woman, even as a child. She talks a lot about how it impacted her self-talk. You're very right. She realizes her own power, and she changes the way she talks to herself.
I mean, that's incredible. And that's, I think, what a lot of people who go through therapy, they have to learn a really hard way. Because I think, we've been taught to be really tough on ourselves because we're the only ones who can control ourselves. Yeah, so relearning that's amazing. That's amazing. what are the... Sorry, I'm like having such an emotional reaction
I know,
to this synopsis.
Yeah.
It's also a really beautiful sunny morning. So I feel the contradictions in that. What are the main themes of this book?
I would say one thing she is really passionate about is how resource extraction impacts women and families. So that would be a theme. Another kind of vein that runs through the story is as Helen is experiencing all these things, as she is, using substances to cope with some of the things she's experienced, she is also a very, at the same time, accomplished woman. Like, she's going to the United Nations and talking about Canada's mistreatment of Indigenous women. She's going to South America and she's building schools. I think a lot of times when people think about people that have problematic substance use, you think you could see it or you would know. And so I think there's this idea that runs through the book that you don't know. You don't necessarily know what people are experiencing when they're not in front of you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I used to play this game with myself when I was living in Vancouver and I was riding the bus.
Yeah.
So I used to look at people on the bus and I would play a game that I would call What is Their Secret?
Okay.
With substance use, we think we can see those that are suffering from it, but we are only seeing a fraction of the people in our community.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm making this book sound, it's just all sad. It's not. It's called A Memoir of Resilience. And another theme that runs through it is how ceremony helped her overcome this substance use that she was using to cope with the things she'd experienced. She talks a lot about her family's resistance to ceremony. There's a lot of focus on dreams, too. So that's another big theme that runs through the book.
And when you say dreams, do you mean goals and ambitions, or do you mean...
No, actual literal dreams.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And Helen Knott is an absolutely captivating woman. Like, I don't know if you've seen any of her spoken word poetry. There's a CBC documentary on her about the Site C Dam and Fort St. John. And she's fascinating, and she's such a good writer. This book was actually nominated for a Jean Clark Local History Award this year, and the committee chair was just so captivated by it that she read it, I think, like 3 times.
Yeah.
It's a big book. It's a big, important book, and it's local, and yeah.
And it's written by somebody prolific.
I mean, Helen Knott went to UMBC.
She's one of us, you guys. Without spoilers, could you describe In My Own Moccasins in 3 words?
Okay, so I would say women, community, and environment.
That sounds great.
Also motherhood. I know that's a 4th thing, but like her relationship with her mother and with her son are very powerful parts of the story.
How many pages is this? It sounds like it should be like 600 pages.
I actually read it over a weekend. It's not a huge book.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's manageable in a few sittings.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. So Knott writes about the atrocities that she faced as an Indigenous woman in Canada, but also the remarkable resiliency that she displayed to overcome those hardships. Do you feel that the tone of the book is more sobering to this reality, or is it more hopeful to the future?
I think it's hopeful.
Yeah.
You know, in the book, you see Helen's mother overcome some of the same struggles that Helen Knott also overcomes. So those are both stories of, resilience. And then you see her commitment to mothering her son, and it's hopeful. For many of us, we don't think about how the past impacts our day-to-day life. But there are so many scenarios in this book where you can just see the lines drawn between generations.
Do you want to talk about the bus stops? Because Helen
Sure,
Knott...
I will talk about the bus stops. So, last year the library put out an anti-racism statement. The board put this out. And one of the things we wanted to make sure that we did was not just put out a statement, but actually do something. And so we committed to promoting works by Black, Indigenous, and people of color, And so we've started a campaign in Prince George where we have these bus shelter ads throughout the city. And one of them featured In My Own Moccasins by Helen Knott. And a local journalist took a picture of it and tagged her in it. And then she shared it. So it's really exciting. And she said something like, Prince George, I'm still in these streets or something. And so it's nice to, you're walking down Fifth Avenue and there's Helen Knott in her book on the bus shelter.
Yeah. Living in Prince George, I grew up in Prince George. This is my home. My family lives here. But there's a real need for local stories, I think, or there's a real hunger for it, and I feel it.
Yeah.
I love to read Canadian books, but still so many of them are based in Toronto, and I'm like, I don't know Toronto that well.
Yeah.
It's harder to connect with, so.
There's an author, Chevy Stevens. She lives on Vancouver Island, and she writes about Vancouver Island. That's where I'm from. And the first book that I read of hers was set in Campbell River, which is like 3 hours from where I grew up. And it's really transformative to read not about New York or Toronto or California, but to read about the place that you're from.
Yes, I agree. So I have a little game, if you'd like to play, of this or that.
Love it.
So I'm going to shout out 2 options, and it's quickly, I won't shout everybody.
Okay.
As quickly as you can, just follow your instincts and give me your answer.
Okay.
Okay. Hardcover or paperback?
Paperback.
Ebooks or audiobooks?
Ebooks.
Bestsellers or classics?
Ooh. Classics.
Yes. Was that English student Victorian literature coming out there? Library books or bookstore?
Bookstore.
Prairie or mountains?
Prairie.
Snow or rain?
Rain.
Oh, that's that Vancouver Island girl. Hot coffee or cold brew?
Hot coffee.
Visit the past or see the future?
Visit the past.
Spring or fall?
Fall.
Optimism or realism?
Optimism.
Routine or spontaneity?
Spontaneity.
Awesome. You did well. You scored 100%. Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming, Amy. This was wonderful and a fascinating conversation.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you for listening to Read This Book, a Prince George Public Library podcast. Please join us every 2 weeks to discover a new book or visit pgpl.ca to explore our catalog.